The woman who walked into Oro Blanco, Arizona on December 14th, 1878 looked like a ghost wrapped in threadbare wool. Her lips blue and hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the post outside the general store. Most people hurried past her without a second glance, their eyes sliding over her pale form as if she were nothing more than another flurry of snow, another piece of winter debris blown in from the mountains. Victoria Daniels had learned in the past 3 weeks that cold did more than freeze your bones. It made you disappear, rendered you invisible to a world that had no time for weakness, no patience for those who could not keep themselves warm. She pressed her forehead against the rough wood, trying to remember the last time she had eaten something more substantial than the handful of pine nuts she had found 2 days ago. Her father was dead. Her brother was dead. Their wagon had broken an axle in the mountain pass, and when her father had gone for help, he had never returned. Her brother had lasted 4 days before the fever took him. She had buried him herself with frozen hands in frozen ground, and then she had started walking because staying meant dying, and some stubborn part of her refused to let the cold win. "Miss," a voice cut through the haze of her exhaustion. "Miss, you need to move along now." Victoria lifted her head slowly. A man in a clean suit stood 3 feet away, his mustache perfectly waxed, his expression a mixture of discomfort and impatience. Behind him, people flowed in and out of shops, their faces ruddy with cold but their bodies wrapped in proper coats, their bellies full of hot food. She tried to speak, but her jaw was too stiff, her tongue too clumsy. "I said move along." The man's voice grew sharper. "We do not tolerate vagrants in this town." She wanted to tell him she was not a vagrant, that 3 months ago she had lived in a proper house in Kansas with curtains in the windows and a garden she tended herself. She wanted to explain that circumstances could change faster than weather, that fate could strip you down to nothing in the time it took for a wagon wheel to snap. Instead, she just stared at him with eyes that felt too large for her face, hollow and desperate. "Sir, I think the lady needs some help." Another voice, deeper and rougher, came from somewhere to her left. "She looks about ready to drop." "That is not our concern, Sullivan. These drifters come through all the time looking for handouts. You give them 1 meal and they never leave." "She is not a drifter. Look at her hands." Victoria felt someone step closer, felt the sudden blessed warmth of another human body near hers. She turned her head with great effort, and found herself looking up at a man in his late 20s with dark hair curling out from under a worn hat. His jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes the color of strong coffee. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical clothes of a working cowboy, leather vest over a flannel shirt, denim trousers tucked into scuffed boots. But it was his eyes that held her. They were looking at her, truly looking at her, as if she were a real person instead of a piece of winter wreckage. "Those are not the hands of someone who has spent her life begging," he continued, his gaze still on her face. "And that dress, under all that dirt, was well made. Something happened to her, something bad. That is still not our problem, Sullivan, maybe not yours." The cowboy's voice remained calm, but something in it made the other man take a step back. "But I am making it mine." Before Victoria could process what was happening, the cowboy had shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth was so sudden and overwhelming that her knees buckled. He caught her easily, one arm sliding around her waist to hold her upright. "Easy now," he murmured. "When did you last eat?" She tried to answer, tried to count back the days, but her mind was too foggy. I cannot remember." "Right, that settles it." He adjusted his grip, taking more of her weight. "Can you walk if I help you?" Victoria nodded, though she was not entirely sure it was true. But she would try. She would try anything to get away from the cold, from the wind that cut through her clothes like knives, from the whiteness that had been trying to erase her for weeks. The cowboy guided her down the street with surprising gentleness, his arm steady around her waist, his pace matching hers. People stared as they passed, but Victoria found she did not care anymore. Let them stare. This man saw her. That was enough. "Name is James Sullivan," he said as they walked. "Most people call me James. I work at the Double S Ranch about 5 miles south of town." "What is your name?" "Victoria," she managed. "Victoria Daniels." "Well, Miss Daniels, I am going to take you to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen, who runs it, is a good woman. She will get you warmed up and fed while we figure out what happened to you." The boarding house was a 2-story building with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, but to Victoria, it looked like a palace. James helped her up the steps and through the front door into a hallway that smelled like coffee and bacon and bread, smells so wonderful that Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. A small Chinese woman appeared from a doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened when she saw Victoria. "Aya, James, what have you brought me?" Found her about to collapse in front of the general store. "She needs food and warmth, Mrs. Chen. I will pay for a room and meals for a week." "A week?" Victoria's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I cannot. I have no money to repay you." James looked down at her, and the expression in his eyes was so kind it made her chest ache. "Let us worry about that later. Right now, you need to get warm, Mrs. Chen took charge immediately, clucking over Victoria like a mother hen, guiding her up the stairs to a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the street. "You sit," she ordered, pushing Victoria gently onto the edge of the bed. "I bring hot water for washing, bring food." "James, you go now. Let the girl have privacy." "Yes, madam." James tipped his hat to Victoria. "I will come by tomorrow to check on you if that is all right." Victoria wanted to thank him properly, wanted to find words adequate to express what he had done for her, but all she could manage was, "Yes, please." After he left, Mrs. Chen helped Victoria out of her filthy clothes and into a basin of hot water that made her skin burn and tingle. The older woman worked efficiently but gently, washing away layers of dirt and dried sweat, combing the tangles from Victoria's long dark hair. By the time she had Victoria dressed in a borrowed nightgown and tucked into bed with a bowl of hot soup, Victoria was crying silently, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of being cared for. "You eat," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Then you sleep. Everything else can wait." Victoria obeyed, spooning the rich broth into her mouth slowly, forcing herself not to gulp it down despite her ravenous hunger. The warmth spread through her body, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the terrible ice in her core begin to thaw. When the bowl was empty, she lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes. She meant to thank Mrs. Chen, meant to ask about payment and work, but sleep dragged her down before she could form the words. She dreamed of her father's face disappearing into white snow, of her brother's hand going cold in hers, of walking and walking through an endless landscape where everything was the same shade of frozen nothing. She dreamed of calling for help and having her voice swallowed by wind, of reaching out and touching only air. But just before dawn, the dreams shifted. She dreamed of brown eyes and a warm coat, of a voice saying she was worth seeing, worth saving. When Victoria woke late the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window, and someone had left a tray with bread and jam and tea on the small table beside her bed. She sat up slowly, her body aching in 1,000 places but her mind clearer than it had been in days. The room was warm. There was a small stove in the corner that someone must have lit while she slept, and clean and safe. She ate the bread slowly, savoring each bite, and tried to plan what came next. She had no money, no family, no possessions except the ruined dress Mrs. Chen had folded neatly on a chair. She would need to find work, need to earn enough to pay James back and support herself. But what work could a woman do in a town like this? She could sew reasonably well, could cook and clean and tend a garden. Perhaps someone needed a housekeeper or a laundress. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Daniels, may I come in?" It was James's voice. "Yes," Victoria called, hastily pulling the blanket up higher around her shoulders, suddenly aware that she was wearing only a borrowed nightgown. He entered carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. He looked different in the full light of day, younger than she had first thought, perhaps only 27 or 28, with an open, honest face that spoke of hard work and integrity. He stopped just inside the doorway, keeping a respectful distance. "Mrs. Chen said you slept well." "That is good." He held out the bundle. "I brought you some clothes. They belong to my sister. She moved to California last year and left a trunk of things behind. I thought they might fit you better than whatever you were wearing." Victoria took the bundle with shaking hands. "Your sister's clothes. Sir, I cannot, James," he corrected. "And yes, you can. Sarah would be happy to know they were helping someone. She was always like that, wanting to fix every stray creature that crossed her path." He smiled slightly. "I seem to have inherited the tendency." Despite everything, Victoria felt her lips curve into a small, answering smile. "I am not a stray creature. No, madam, I do not think you are." His expression grew more serious. "But I do think something terrible happened to you. When you are ready, I would like to hear about it. Not because I am nosy, but because I might be able to help." Victoria looked down at her hands. They were cleaner now, but still showed the evidence of hard travel, broken nails, healing cuts, the beginning of frostbite on 2 fingers. "My father and brother are dead," she said quietly. "We were traveling from Kansas to California. Our wagon broke in the mountain pass west of here. My father went for help and never came back. My brother got sick from the cold. He died 4 days later. I buried him, and then I started walking because I did not know what else to do." James was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I am sorry. That is a terrible thing to survive alone." "I almost did not survive it." Victoria met his eyes. "If you had not stopped yesterday, I think I would have frozen to death last night. Everyone else looked right through me as if I were not there, as if the cold had already turned me into a ghost." "I saw you," James said simply. "And I will keep seeing you, Miss Daniels, until you are back on your feet and ready to stand on your own. That is a promise." Something in Victoria's chest loosened at those words, some tight knot of fear and loneliness she had been carrying since her father disappeared. "Why?" she asked. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." James shrugged. "My father used to say that the measure of a man was what he did when he could walk away. Most folks yesterday could have walked away easy. I could have too. But I looked at you and I saw someone who was fighting hard not to give up, and I thought that was worth something." "Thought you were worth something." He cleared his throat, suddenly looking self-conscious. "Anyway, I should let you get dressed. Mrs. Chen is making lunch. If you feel up to it, come down and eat. If not, she will bring something up." He left before Victoria could respond, closing the door gently behind him. She sat for a moment, holding the bundle of clothes, feeling the weight of tears in her throat. Then she stood and unwrapped the paper. Inside were 2 dresses, one a simple brown wool day dress with long sleeves and a high collar, the other a slightly finer dark blue calico with small white flowers. There was also a warm petticoat, clean undergarments, thick stockings, and a shawl. At the very bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a pair of sturdy leather boots. Victoria dressed slowly in the brown wool dress, which fit remarkably well except for being slightly long in the sleeves. The boots were perhaps half a size too large, but with the thick stockings they would work fine. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, she barely recognized her own reflection. She was thinner than she had been, her cheekbones sharp and her eyes too large, but she looked human again. She looked visible downstairs. Mrs. Chen's dining room held 3 other boarders, 2 minors, and an older woman who sold vegetables from a cart, all eating lunch at a long wooden table. James sat at one end, talking quietly with one of the minors. When Victoria appeared in the doorway, he stood immediately. "Miss Daniels, please sit." He pulled out a chair for her. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate piled high with roasted chicken, potatoes, and carrots. "You eat everything," she commanded, setting it in front of Victoria. "You are too thin. You need meat on your bones." Victoria did not need to be told twice. She ate steadily, forcing herself to pace so she would not get sick, while the conversation flowed around her. The miners were discussing a new vein of silver they had found. The vegetable seller was complaining about the weather making it hard to grow anything. James mostly listened, occasionally asking a question or offering a comment. He had an easy way about him, Victoria noticed, a calmness that seemed to put people at ease. When the meal was finished and the other boarders had left, James turned to Victoria. "I have been thinking about your situation. You will need work, I assume, to support yourself and pay back what you owe for room and board." "Yes." Victoria kept her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "I can sew and cook and clean. I am a hard worker. I just need someone willing to give me a chance." "Well, as it happens, the Double S Ranch where I work has been needing someone to help our cook. Old Charlie is getting on in years, and the work is getting too much for him alone, especially during winter when we have all the hands in for meals instead of them being out on the range. The job would mean cooking and cleaning for about 20 ranch hands, plus the owner and his family. It is hard work, but it comes with a small cabin of your own, 3 meals a day, and wages of $20 a month. Victoria's heart jumped. $20 a month was more than she had hoped for. "The owner would hire me, just like that." "The owner is my uncle, Samuel Sullivan. He raised me after my parents died when I was 12. He is a good man, fair and decent. I think if I vouched for you, he would give you a trial period." James leaned forward slightly. "But I need to be honest with you, Miss Daniels. Ranch life is not easy, especially not for a woman alone. The hands are good men mostly, but rough around the edges. You would need to be able to hold your own, set boundaries, not take any nonsense. And the work is dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. Could you handle that?" Victoria thought about the past 3 weeks, about digging a grave with frozen hands, about walking mile after mile through snow with nothing but stubbornness keeping her alive. "I can handle it," she said firmly. "I am stronger than I look." James studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you are. All right then. I will ride out to the ranch this afternoon and talk to Uncle Samuel. If he agrees, I will come back tomorrow and take you out there. You can stay here at Mrs. Chen's tonight and get your strength back." "I will pay you back," Victoria said. "Every penny you have spent on me, I promise." "I know you will." James stood, picking up his hat from where it hung on his chair. "Not because I need the money, but because I can see you are the type of person who keeps her promises." After he left, Victoria helped Mrs. Chen clear the table and wash the dishes, despite the older woman's protests. "You should rest," Mrs. Chen scolded. "You are still recovering." "I have rested enough," Victoria replied. "I need to start moving forward. I need to start living again instead of just surviving." Mrs. Chen looked at her with sharp, knowing eyes. "James is a good man, Best man I know in this town. You are lucky he found you." "I know," Victoria said softly. "He sees you, Mrs." Chen continued, her hands moving efficiently through the soapy water. "Really sees you. That is rare. Most people, they look but they do not see. They do not want to see because seeing means they might have to do something, might have to care. But James, he has always been different. Always picking up the broken things, trying to fix them." "I am not broken," Victoria said, a little sharply. Mrs. Chen smiled. "No, bent maybe, but not broken. That is good. James needs someone strong, someone who can match him." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "I just met him yesterday. And he is only helping me find work. MMM." Mrs. Chen's tone suggested she thought otherwise, but she let the subject drop. That evening, Victoria sat in her small room and wrote a letter to her aunt in Missouri, the only family she had left. She explained what had happened to her father and brother, trying to keep her tone factual rather than emotional, knowing that breaking down into tears over the paper would accomplish nothing. She described Oro Blanco and James Sullivan and the job opportunity at the ranch. She did not know if she would ever be able to afford to post the letter, but writing it made her feel less alone, less like she had disappeared completely from the world that had known her before. James returned the next morning just after breakfast, riding a sturdy bay horse and leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. "Uncle Samuel says to bring you out," he announced, dismounting with easy grace. "He wants to meet you before making a final decision, but I told him you would do fine, and he trusts my judgment." Victoria, dressed in the blue calico dress and Sarah's boots, came out carrying the small bundle of her remaining possessions, which amounted to little more than the brown dress, and the clothes she had been wearing when she arrived. James secured the bundle to his saddle, then helped her mount the mare. "This is Daisy," he said. "She is old and patient and will not give you any trouble. Have you ridden before?" "Some, though not in a long time." Victoria settled into the saddle, feeling the mare's warmth beneath her. It felt good to be on horseback, good to be moving with purpose. The ride to the Double S Ranch took about an hour. James kept the pace easy, pointing out landmarks as they went, the creek that sometimes flooded in spring, the abandoned mine shaft where someone had found gold 30 years ago, the stand of cottonwoods where eagles nested in summer. He talked easily, filling the silence without demanding responses, and Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride. The ranch itself was bigger than she had expected, with a large main house, several barns, a bunkhouse, and various other outbuildings spread across a shallow valley. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the brown winter grass. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and as they rode into the yard, several dogs came running out to greet them, tails wagging. James dismounted and helped Victoria down, his hands steady at her waist. "Uncle Samuel should be in his office. Let me take you to him." He led her to the main house and through to a room lined with books and papers. A man in his late 50s sat behind a large desk, his hair more silver than brown, his face weathered by years of outdoor work. He looked up as they entered and smiled. "So this is Miss Daniels. James has been singing your praises all morning." He stood and extended his hand. "Samuel Sullivan, welcome to the Double S." Victoria shook his hand, noting the calluses that matched James's, the strength in his grip. "Thank you for seeing me, sir. James tells me you might have work for me." "Might indeed. Our cook Charlie is a fine man, but he needs help. The question is whether you are the right help." Samuel gestured for her to sit. "James tells me you have had a rough time of it lately." "Lost your family in the mountains?" "Yes, sir." Victoria kept her voice steady. "My father and brother both. I am the only one left." "I am sorry for your loss." Samuel's sympathy seemed genuine. "Losing family is never easy, but I need to know you are up for this work. Cooking for ranch hands is not like cooking for a family. These men work hard and they eat like horses. You would be preparing 3 big meals a day, plus coffee and snacks throughout. You would also be responsible for keeping the cookhouse clean, doing inventory of supplies, helping Charlie with whatever he needs. Can you do that?" Victoria met his eyes squarely. "I can, sir. I am not afraid of hard work." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I am willing to give you a month trial. You will help Charlie, learn his routines, prove you can handle the job. If it works out, the position is yours permanently. $20 a month plus room and board. You will have your own cabin behind the cookhouse. We provide firewood and basic supplies." Questions? "No, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." "Do not thank me yet," Samuel said with a slight smile. "Wait until you have survived dinner tonight. We have 18 hands in for meals right now, and they can be a rowdy bunch." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "James, why do not you show Miss Daniels to her cabin and then take her to meet Charlie? Supper is at 6. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a single room containing a bed, a stove, a table with 1 chair, and some shelves. It was clean and dry and blessedly warm, and to Victoria it looked like heaven. James set her bundle on the table. "It is not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "It is perfect," Victoria replied honestly. "It is more than I had yesterday." James smiled at that. "Come on, then. Let me introduce you to Charlie before he gets started on supper." Charlie turned out to be a bow-legged man in his late 60s with no hair, enormous eyebrows, and a gravelly voice that suggested he had spent his life shouting orders. He looked Victoria up and down with a skeptical expression. "You do not look like much," he announced. "You sure you can handle this?" "I am sure," Victoria replied calmly. "Tell me what you need me to do." Charlie grunted. "Right now I need 3 dozen biscuits, 2 pots of beans, and a roast big enough to feed 20 men. Think you can manage biscuits?" "Yes, sir." "All right then. Flour is in that barrel, lard is in the crock, salt in the jar. Get to work." For the next few hours, Victoria worked alongside Charlie in the big cookhouse kitchen, following his barked instructions, learning where things were kept and how he liked things done. Her hands remembered the motions of kneading dough, of rolling and cutting biscuits, of stirring beans so they would not stick. The work was familiar and comforting, and she found herself falling into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. James checked in once around mid-afternoon, ostensibly to steal a fresh biscuit, but really, Victoria suspected, to make sure she was all right. Charlie swatted at him with a wooden spoon. "Get out of my kitchen, boy. You can eat at supper like everyone else." "Yes, Charlie." James caught Victoria's eye and winked before retreating. At 6 o'clock, the ranch hands came pouring into the dining room, a long space attached to the kitchen, with several tables and benches. They were exactly as rough and rowdy as Samuel had warned, tracking in mud and snow, talking loudly, jostling each other for seats. But they quieted down when Charlie started bringing out the food, and they ate with the focused intensity of men who worked hard for their meals. Victoria helped serve, carrying platters of roast beef and bowls of beans and baskets of biscuits, refilling coffee cups, answering requests for butter or salt or more of this or that. Some of the men stared at her with curiosity, a few with more than curiosity, but when James caught someone looking too long or too rudely, a single glance from him was enough to make the offender look away. After the meal, Victoria and Charlie washed what seemed like mountains of dishes while the hands drifted back to the bunkhouse or to various evening tasks. Her back ached and her feet hurt and her hands were red from hot water, but she felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with purpose. "You did all right today," Charlie said as they hung up the last of the dish towels. "Better than all right, truth be told. You know your way around a kitchen." "Thank you," Victoria said. "My mother taught me to cook when I was young. She said a woman who could feed people well would never go hungry." "Smart woman." Charlie looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You can come back tomorrow morning at 5. We will make breakfast together." 5 in the morning came brutally early, but Victoria dragged herself out of bed and made her way through the dark to the cookhouse. The next days fell into a pattern wake before dawn. Help prepare breakfast, clean up. Prepare lunch, clean up. Prepare dinner, clean up. Collapse into bed and do it all again. The work was exhausting but also healing in its own way. It gave her no time to dwell on loss, no space for grief to overwhelm her. James appeared regularly, always finding some excuse to stop by the cookhouse. He would help carry heavy sacks of flour, or split firewood for the stove or taste test whatever Victoria was making and declare it delicious. They fell into easy conversation during these visits, talking about small things, at first the weather, the cattle, the quirks of various ranch hands. But gradually they began to share more substantial pieces of themselves. Victoria learned that James had been born in Texas, that his parents had died of typhoid when he was 12, that Samuel and his wife Margaret had raised him as their own son alongside their daughter Sarah. She learned that he loved horses more than cattle, that he could play the harmonica reasonably well, that he had once considered becoming a schoolteacher, but decided he could not stand being indoors all day. James learned that Victoria had grown up in Missouri, that she had briefly attended a teaching college before her father's business failed, and she had to return home to help support the family. He learned that she loved to read but had not touched a book in months, that she had once had a garden where she grew prize-winning tomatoes, that she missed her mother dead 5 years now with an ache that time had not diminished. 2 weeks into her trial period, a blizzard hit. Snow fell for 3 days straight, trapping everyone on the ranch and making even the short walk from cabin to cookhouse a dangerous endeavor. The hands stayed close to the bunkhouse, venturing out only to tend to the animals in the nearest barn. Meals became simpler by necessity, stews and soups that could stretch to feed however many people ended up sheltering in the cookhouse. On the second day of the storm, James arrived at the cookhouse just after the lunch rush, shaking snow from his coat. "Roads are completely closed," he announced. "No one is getting in or out of the ranch until this clears." Victoria, who was kneading bread dough, looked up. "Are we running low on supplies? We will be fine for food. Charlie always keeps us well stocked, but if anyone gets sick or injured, we cannot get to town for the doctor." James moved closer to the stove, holding his hands out to warm them. "How are you holding up?" "I am fine." Victoria punched down the dough with more force than necessary. "It is just snow." "You do not like winter much, do you?" Victoria's hands stilled. "Winter tried to kill me," she said quietly. "It took my family and nearly took me too, so no, I do not like it much." James was silent for a moment, then he said, "My parents died in summer, hottest August on record. For years afterward, I hated summer, hated the heat and the bright sun, and the way everyone acted like it was a fine time to be alive when all I could think about was my mother burning up with fever." He paused. "But then Uncle Samuel told me something that helped. He said the seasons are not our enemies. They are just themselves. It is the circumstances that hurt us, not the weather." "That is very philosophical," Victoria said, but her tone was gentler. "Maybe, but it helped me. Helped me see that I could not hate a quarter of the year for the rest of my life. Had to make peace with it somehow." He reached out and gently brushed a streak of flour from her cheek, the gesture so natural and intimate that Victoria's breath caught. "You will make peace with winter too, eventually. Give it time." Their eyes held for a long moment. Then Charlie bustled in from the pantry, breaking the spell, and James stepped back quickly. "I should get going. Uncle Samuel wants help checking on the cattle in the south pasture." After he left, Charlie gave Victoria a knowing look. "That boy is sweet on you." "He is just being kind," Victoria replied, focusing intently on shaping the bread loaves. If you say so." Charlie did not sound convinced. But over the following weeks, as Victoria's trial period ended and she was confirmed as permanent kitchen help, the truth of Charlie's observation became harder to deny. James found more and more reasons to be near her. He would appear in the evening after her work was done and walk her back to her cabin, talking about his day or asking about hers. He brought her a book he thought she might enjoy, a collection of poems by Emily Dickinson. He fixed a loose board on her cabin steps without being asked. He made sure she had extra firewood stacked by her door before each storm. And Victoria, despite her best intentions to remain focused solely on survival and stability, found herself watching for him, found herself smiling more when he was around, found herself noticing things about him: the way he was patient with even the most difficult horses, the way he spoke respectfully to everyone regardless of their station, the way his whole face transformed when he laughed. It was Charlie who finally forced the issue. 6 weeks into Victoria's employment, he pulled her aside after breakfast and said bluntly, "That boy is in love with you and you are in love with him. Everyone on this ranch can see it, except apparently you two. Someone needs to do something about it before you both drive the rest of us crazy with all this mooning about." Victoria felt her face flame. "Charlie, I cannot. He is the nephew of my employer. It would not be appropriate." "Appropriate?" Charlie snorted. "Girl, life is too short and too hard to worry about appropriate. You have been through hell. You deserve some happiness. And James is the best man I know. He would treat you right." "I know he would," Victoria said softly. "That is not the question." "Then what is the question?" Victoria struggled to articulate the fear that kept her from acknowledging what she felt. "I lost everything," she finally said. "My father, my brother, my home, nearly my life. I cannot risk caring about someone that much again. I cannot survive losing anyone else." Charlie's expression softened. "You are not going to lose James. That boy is solid as oak. He is not going anywhere. You do not know that. None of us know what the future holds. Look what happened to my family. One minute we were fine, the next minute everything was gone." "That is true," Charlie agreed. "None of us are promised tomorrow, but that is exactly why you should not waste today. You think holding yourself back from caring is going to protect you. It will not. It will just make you lonely and sad. And it will hurt James, who has done nothing but try to help you since the day he found you." Victoria blinked back tears. "What if I am not ready? What if I am still too broken?" "Then you tell him that. You be honest. But you give him the chance to make his own choice about whether he wants to wait for you." Charlie patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Now stop crying and go peel those potatoes. We have lunch to make." Victoria tried to follow Charlie's advice, tried to work up the courage to talk to James. But every time she saw him, the words stuck in her throat. How did you tell someone you had feelings for them when you were still trying to piece yourself back together? How did you explain that you were terrified of the very thing you wanted most? The decision was taken out of her hands on a bright, cold day in late February. Victoria had finished her morning work early and decided to take a rare walk away from the ranch buildings. The snow had mostly melted, leaving the ground muddy but passable, and she needed air and space to think. She walked out toward the creek, following a path that wound through bare cottonwood trees. The water was running fast with snowmelt, clear and cold and loud. She stood on the bank, watching it flow, thinking about how water always kept moving forward, always found its way around obstacles. Beautiful day. James's voice came from behind her. Victoria turned to find him leaning against a tree, his hat pushed back, his expression unreadable. "How long have you been standing there?" "A few minutes. You looked like you needed some quiet." He pushed off the tree and came to stand beside her. "Are you all right, Victoria? You have seemed troubled lately." This was her chance. Victoria took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about something Charlie said." "What did that old meddler say?" But James's tone was affectionate. "He said that you and I have been dancing around something that everyone else can see clearly." Victoria forced herself to meet James's eyes. "He said you have feelings for me." James went very still. "He did he? Do you?" Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Have feelings for me?" For a long moment, James did not answer. Then he said quietly, "Would it matter if I did? You have made it pretty clear you are focused on your work, on rebuilding your life." "That is not an answer." "All right. Yes." James's voice was rough. "Yes, I have feelings for you. I have had them since the day I saw you outside that general store, looking like the whole world had given up on you, but you refused to give up on yourself. I have watched you fight your way back from nearly dying, watched you work harder than most men I know, watched you be kind to people even when you are exhausted and hurting. And every day I have tried to be patient, tried to give you space to heal, tried not to push you into something you were not ready for. But yes, Victoria, I care about you, more than I probably should." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I am terrified," she whispered. "Of me, of losing you, of caring about someone again and having fate rip them away from me. I cannot." Her voice broke. "I cannot bury anyone else, James. I cannot survive that again." James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You are not going to lose me. I am not going anywhere." "You cannot promise that." "No," he agreed. "I cannot promise I will live forever. None of us can. But I can promise I will fight to stay with you every single day I have. I can promise I will be careful and smart and will not take foolish risks. I can promise that I see you, Victoria, really see you, and that I want to spend every day I am given trying to make you happy." He cupped her face gently in both hands. "I know you are scared. I know you have been through hell. But please do not let fear steal whatever time we could have together. Life took a lot from you already. Do not let it take this too." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling his warmth, his solid presence, and something in her chest, some cold, frozen place she had been protecting, finally cracked open. "I care about you too," she whispered. "So much it scares me." "Then be scared with me," James murmured. "But be with me." She opened her eyes and found him looking at her with such tenderness, such hope, that the last of her resistance crumbled. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, all right." James smiled, that full, transformative smile that made him look years younger, and then he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and tasted like possibility, like spring coming after a hard winter. Victoria kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and for the first time since her father had walked into those mountains and never returned, she felt fully alive. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "Me too," Victoria admitted. "I just did not know how to let myself want anything again." "Well, you can start wanting now. Want whatever you like. I will do my best to give it to you." They stood by the creek for a long time, holding each other, talking quietly about what came next. James wanted to court her properly, he said. He wanted to take her to town for dinners, wanted to introduce her to people as his sweetheart, wanted everyone to know he was serious about her. Victoria, who had not thought about the future in anything but practical terms for months, found herself dreaming again. Maybe she could have a life here. Maybe she could have love and home and family again. Maybe fate was not done giving her good things after all. Over the following months, James courted Victoria with patient determination. He took her to Saturday dances in town, where they waltzed to fiddle music, and she laughed more than she had in years. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range. He taught her to ride better, spending hours with her in the corral until she felt confident on horseback. He sat with her in the evenings and read aloud from the books he borrowed from his uncle's library, while she mended clothes or shelled peas, or did the 100 small tasks that filled her days. The ranch hands, who had initially been skeptical of having a woman in the cookhouse, grew protective of Victoria. They made sure no one gave her trouble, made sure everyone treated her with respect. When one drifter made the mistake of making a crude comment in her presence, 3 different men made it clear he should move along, and James made it even clearer that such behavior would not be tolerated anywhere near Victoria. Samuel and his wife Margaret welcomed Victoria warmly. Margaret, a plump woman with gray-streaked hair and a kind smile, took Victoria shopping in town for new dresses and invited her to dinner at the main house. "James has been alone too long," she confided. "It does my heart good to see him happy again." As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, Victoria felt herself healing in ways she had not known she needed. The constant work kept her strong. Charlie's gruff companionship gave her purpose, but it was James who made her feel whole again. He was patient with her fears, understanding when she had bad days, celebrating with her when she had good ones. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, but he made it clear he was serious about a future with her. On a warm evening in late October, nearly a year after he had found her frozen and invisible outside that general store, James took Victoria riding out to a ridge that overlooked the ranch. They sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red and purple, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I want to ask you something." She lifted her head to look at him. "All right." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I am not a rich man. I cannot offer you a big house in town or fancy dresses or an easy life. But I can offer you my whole heart, my loyalty, and a place to call home for as long as we both live. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, nothing fancy, but beautiful in its simplicity. Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, of course I will marry you." James slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back, and she kissed him back with all the love she had been afraid to feel. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, the stars were starting to come out overhead. "I love you," James said, as if he had been waiting his whole life to say those words to someone. "I love you too," Victoria replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Samuel officiating and half the town in attendance. Victoria wore a dress of ivory silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and James wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes shining as he watched her walk toward him. Charlie cried openly during the vows, much to everyone's amusement, and the celebration afterward lasted until dawn, with music and dancing and more food than even a ranch full of cowboys could eat. Samuel gave them a section of land on the far eastern edge of the ranch as a wedding gift. "Build your house there," he said. "Start your life there. It is good land with water and timber. It will serve you well." Over the winter, James and several of the hands built a cabin on that land, nothing enormous, but solid and well made, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above, a good fireplace, and windows that let in plenty of light. Victoria spent her free time making curtains and braiding rugs and turning the house into a home. She left her job at the cookhouse, though she still helped Charlie during the busy seasons, and focused instead on building the life she and James had dreamed about during their long courtship. On a cold February morning, almost exactly 2 years after James had first seen her through the storm, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told James that evening, nervous about his reaction, but he picked her up and spun her around with pure joy on his face. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born in early November 1880, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's brown eyes. They named him Thomas Daniel Sullivan, after Victoria's father and brother. James was a devoted father from the first moment, staying up with Victoria through long nights, learning to change diapers and mix feeding bottles, talking to Thomas with complete seriousness, even though the baby could not possibly understand a word. Victoria had worried that motherhood might bring back all her grief and trauma, might remind her too much of everything she had lost. But instead, she found it healing. Every time she held Thomas, every time she saw James cradling their son with such gentleness and love, she felt the last cold places in her heart thaw. She had survived the winter. She had survived loss and grief and near death. And on the other side of all that darkness, she had found this family, home, love. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret Sarah, after James's aunt and sister. She had Victoria's dark eyes and stubborn chin, and from the moment she could crawl, she was trying to follow her older brother everywhere. James built a larger room onto the cabin to accommodate the growing family, and Victoria planted the garden she had dreamed about, growing vegetables and herbs and even some flowers. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons passing and children growing. Thomas learned to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around the ranch with devoted determination. Margaret turned out to have her mother's gift for cooking and her father's way with animals. They were happy children, secure and loved, growing up with both parents and extended family around them. Samuel and Margaret continued to be active presences in their lives, doting on their grandchildren by adoption, teaching them to read and helping Victoria homeschool them. Charlie remained a close friend, often appearing at their cabin for supper and to tell outrageous stories that made the children shriek with laughter. The ranch hands who had known Victoria since she first arrived treated her with affectionate respect, and several became regular visitors, stopping by to see the children or help James with various projects. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James took Victoria back to the ridge where he had proposed. They left the children with Margaret and rode out in the late afternoon, arriving in time to watch the sunset just as they had years before. "You ever regret it?" James asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Marrying me, I mean, living out here instead of in a town somewhere with more society and culture." Victoria looked at him in surprise. "Not once, not ever. This is exactly the life I want, even though you had to go through so much to get here." She was quiet for a moment, thinking about her father and brother, about the cold that had nearly claimed her, about the fear and grief she had carried for so long. "I would not choose to go through that again," she said slowly. "But I also cannot wish it had not happened because it brought me to you. It brought me here, and I cannot imagine my life without you, without our children, without this place we have built together." "I saw you," James said softly. "When everyone else looked past you, I saw you. And I have never regretted stopping, never regretted bringing you to the ranch, never regretted falling in love with you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Sullivan." "You saved my life," Victoria replied, her eyes filling with happy tears. "Not just by getting me warm and fed that day, but by seeing me as a person worth saving, worth loving. You gave me back myself, James. How could I ever regret that?" They stayed on the ridge until the stars came out, talking quietly about their children and their hopes for the future. Thomas wanted to be a rancher like his father. Margaret had recently announced she wanted to be a doctor, which was unusual for a girl but not impossible if she was determined enough. They talked about maybe adding another room to the cabin, about getting Margaret a pony of her own, about teaching Thomas to track animals. They talked about all the ordinary, wonderful things that made up a life. When they rode home under a brilliant moon, Victoria felt a deep contentment she had never expected to feel again after those dark days in the mountains. Life had taken so much from her, but it had also given her more than she could have imagined. She had survived winter. She had survived invisibility, and she had emerged on the other side to find love and family and home. Over the following years, their family continued to grow. Victoria gave birth to another son when Margaret was 4, a sturdy boy they named James Samuel Sullivan, after his father and grandfather. He was quieter than his older siblings, but with a thoughtful nature that reminded Victoria of her own brother. 2 years after that came twin girls, Elizabeth and Caroline, who kept the whole household in chaos with their energy and mischief. The cabin had to be expanded twice more to accommodate everyone, until it was less a cabin and more a proper house, with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen where the family gathered for meals. James built a barn and corrals, acquired more horses, and began breeding them in addition to his ranch work. Victoria's garden grew each year, providing food for their large family and extra to sell in town. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and happy. Thomas grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. At 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a smart girl named Catherine who was not afraid of hard work. Margaret, true to her childhood declaration, went away to medical school in California when she was 20, determined to become a doctor despite the obstacles facing women in that profession. James Jr. became a talented horse trainer with a gift for working with difficult animals. The twins, inseparable as always, announced at 16 that they wanted to open a bakery in town together, and began experimenting with recipes that filled the house with wonderful smells. Through it all, James and Victoria remained partners in every sense of the word. They worked together, raised their children together, weathered hardships and celebrated joys together. The years had added gray to James's hair and lines around Victoria's eyes, but the love between them had only deepened. They still walked together in the evenings when their work was done, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same tenderness they had felt when they first fell in love. Samuel passed away when he was 72, peacefully in his sleep, and left the Double S Ranch to James, who continued to run it with the same integrity and fairness his uncle had shown. Margaret followed a few years later, and her passing was harder, more painful, but she died surrounded by family who loved her and had been loved by her in return. Charlie made it to 83 before his heart finally gave out. At his funeral, Victoria spoke about how he had given her purpose when she needed it most, how he had been friend and mentor and surrogate grandfather to her children. Half the town turned out to honor him, and Victoria made sure his grave was always tended with fresh flowers. Thomas married Catherine and took over a section of the ranch, building a house of his own and starting a family. They gave Victoria and James 4 grandchildren to spoil. Margaret became Dr. Margaret Sullivan and opened a practice in San Francisco, where she focused on treating women and children, especially those who could not afford expensive doctors. She never married, too devoted to her work, but she came home every Christmas laden with gifts and stories. James Jr. married a widow with 2 young children of her own and proved to be an excellent stepfather, patient and kind. The twins did open their bakery, which became famous throughout the territory for the best bread and pastries anyone had ever tasted. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Victoria and James stood once again on the ridge that had become their special place. They were both in their 50s now, their children grown or nearly grown, their hair more gray than dark. But when James took Victoria's hand, the touch felt exactly the same as it had the first time he had helped her onto a horse. 25 years, James mused, feels like yesterday and forever all at once. You remember that day you found me? Victoria asked. How I looked? I remember thinking you were the most determined person I had ever seen. You were half frozen and starving, but you were still standing, still fighting. I knew right then you were special. Everyone else looked right through me. I know, but I saw you. And I am so grateful I did, because it gave me this. He gestured at the vista before them, at the ranch lands that stretched to the horizon, but Victoria knew he meant more than the physical land. He meant their life, their family, everything they had built together. I was invisible until you saw me, Victoria said softly. The winter had erased me, but you found me in the storm. And you let me, James replied. That took courage, Victoria, letting yourself be seen when you had every reason to hide to protect yourself. Letting yourself love again when you had lost so much, that was brave. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun set over the land they had made their home. We were brave together. Yes, James agreed. Together. They stood there as the light faded and the stars emerged. 2 people who had found each other in the midst of winter and built a life that warmed them both. Around them, the land stretched peaceful and quiet, marked now with the home they had made, the children they had raised, the love they had sustained through all the years. When they finally rode home under a canopy of stars, their grandchildren ran out to meet them, Thomas's youngest daughter riding on James's shoulders, the twins' new apprentice baker chattering to Victoria about a recipe he wanted to try. Inside the house, lamps glowed warm and golden, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was not the life Victoria had imagined when she was a young woman in Missouri, before loss had reshaped her world. But it was the life she had chosen after surviving winter, after being seen, and saved by a cowboy who looked past what everyone else could not see. As she walked through the door of her home, surrounded by family and love and the evidence of years well lived, Victoria sent up a silent thanks for the storm that had nearly killed her, but instead had brought her to exactly where she belonged. The winter had tried to make her invisible, to erase her from the world, but James had seen her through it all. And in seeing her, he had helped her see herself again, not as a victim of circumstance, not as someone broken beyond repair, but as a woman capable of surviving anything, of building something beautiful from ruins, of loving fiercely even after loss. They lived many more years together, watching grandchildren grow into adults and give them great-grandchildren, watching their ranch prosper, watching their children thrive in their chosen paths. And when James finally passed away peacefully at the age of 76, with Victoria holding his hand, and their children gathered around them, his last words were, "I saw you. I always saw you." Victoria lived another 8 years after James, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy they had built. On warm evenings, she would sometimes sit on the porch of the house James had built for her and watch the sun set over the ranch lands, remembering a cold December day when she had been invisible and a cowboy had seen her anyway. She remembered the storm, both literal and metaphorical, that she had survived, and she remembered the love that had warmed her through every winter since. When Victoria died at 84, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they buried her next to James on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read, "Victoria Daniel Sullivan, seen, loved, remembered." And everyone who came to pay their respects told stories of her strength, her kindness, her courage. They spoke of how she had survived impossible odds, how she had built a life from nothing, how she had loved fiercely and well. But the story they told most often was the simplest one. That on a cold winter day when she was invisible to everyone else, a cowboy saw her through the storm, and that single act of seeing had changed both their lives forever. It was a story about survival and love, about how one person's compassion could save another person's life, about how even in the darkest winter there could be warmth if you were brave enough to reach for it. And for generations after, when children asked their grandparents about the couple in the portrait that hung in the ranch house, a handsome man with kind eyes and a beautiful woman with a determined chin, they would hear the story of how winter made her invisible, and a cowboy saw her through the storm. They would hear about courage and kindness, about second chances and new beginnings, about love that endured through all seasons. And they would understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do is to really see another person, to look past what others look past, to recognize the humanity and worth in someone when the rest of the world has decided they are invisible. That was the legacy Victoria and James left behind, not just land and houses and descendants, but the reminder that we are all responsible for seeing each other, for reaching out when someone is struggling, for choosing compassion over convenience. They left behind proof that love can bloom even in the coldest winters, that one act of kindness can change the trajectory of a life, that being seen really, truly seen can be the difference between surviving and thriving. Their story became legend in Oro Blanco, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who knew the truth, who had lived through those years and witnessed that love firsthand, it was something more precious than legend. It was proof that goodness exists in the world, that people can be kind even when they do not have to be, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. And on cold winter nights, when storms rolled through the Arizona territory and snow fell thick and white, people in Oro Blanco would gather around their fires and tell the story again. They would speak of a woman who was made invisible by winter's cruelty, and of a cowboy who saw her anyway. They would talk about how he had saved her life, and how in saving her, he had found his own salvation. They would remember that love is not just about romance and passion, but about seeing another person fully and choosing to stand beside them through whatever storms may come. It was a story about the Wild West, about hard times and harder choices, about survival and perseverance. But more than that, it was a love story, the best kind of love story, the kind where two people find each other against all odds and build something lasting and true. It was the story of Victoria and James, of winter and cowboys, of invisibility and being seen. And it was a story that would never be forgotten, passed down through generations as a reminder that even in our darkest, coldest moments, there is always the possibility of being seen, of being saved, of being loved. All we have to do is be brave enough to keep standing until someone looks close enough to see us through the storm.